You're now watching two old farts making noises.
Do you want to know why some businesses succeed and some businesses fail? Why some businesses grow and some businesses don't? That's what this show is all about. Business, business, business. And we are here. There you go.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Lost Dollar Business Club. We have our special guest, Michael Collins, who's the author of Dismantling the American Dream, How Multinational Corporations Undermine American Prosperity. And Michael Collins has been writing about the ills and follies of free trade and multinational corporations for many years now. So we're very happy to have him on the show.
Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you.
So, and for everybody watching, not listening, but everybody watching the show on YouTube, Michael's at a place where he does not have video, so we just get to see the little round dot. But unfortunately for all the rest of you, you get to see us. So just to give everyone the heads up, there's nothing wrong. It's like outer limits. There's nothing wrong with your television. Don't adjust the dial. Everything is good.
That's a good reference. That's a very good reference.
There you go. Yeah. All right, gentlemen. Michael, would you like to give a brief overview?
That's right. Let's start off with that.
Well, I've been writing about manufacturing since 2004 when I retired after 35 years in manufacturing. And I was a general manager of two divisions that built robots and automated production lines for the Fortune 500 corporations. They were our customers. So I worked with them for 30 years and I got to get inside their plants and talk about their plans. And I followed what they did and the decisions they made since around 1980. So I became very cognizant of their strategies. And then after I retired in 2004, I began writing about them and eventually wrote the book, Dismantling the American Dream.
That's a great history right there. And you were on the inside. So that's what was pretty compelling for me to hear, because you're talking about, you've made the claim in the book that from the 40s to the 80s, 1940 to 1980, corporations were sharing productivity gains with labor. And then after Reagan-ish era, it changed. So can you talk us through a little bit what changed with this leaving of this sharing with labor, and then maybe the Milton Friedman doctrine that became more prevalent, the shareholders, putting shareholders supreme?
Yes. In the 1970s, when Japan started to invade the U.S., it was the first time that the multinationals started to see the influx of foreign corporations, and their margins started to dwindle. So the reaction was, after 1980, during Reagan, their reaction was to begin to outsource production to low-cost countries, and and part of their strategy was to lower labor costs in any way they could. And so they began, I was involved in that through automation, but it was basically an all-out effort to reduce labor costs by outsourcing and by other strategies that they used domestically to reduce wages, etc.
Well, didn't labor notice this? Did anybody notice this and then try to challenge it and try to preserve the relationship between productivity gains and wages?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that the big unions started to see what was happening, but they seemed paralyzed. They didn't do the things they probably needed to do, uh, and and so when you look back on it in 1950s, the the private industries had about 35% union employees. By
Right.
the time I wrote the book, there was a little over 6% of labor. So one of the strategies the multinationals used in reducing wages was to get rid of unions, and they were very successful at it. And I guess to answer your question, the the unions did not seem to ever be able to come up with a plan to try to keep themselves afloat. So we lost most of private industry in the big unions.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Reagan, you bring up Reagan breaking the air traffic controllers strike and successfully doing that, and then that leading to the deunionization of corporations all across the country. I think what people hopefully listening to the podcast already know about the crisis that we're pointing to is that, and that you wrote in the book, wages have stagnated since the 80s or have even gone down for certain aspects of the population. The big question is how did that happen, and how is that continuing today?
Well, it's um, there is no real simple answer, but
Yeah,
the obvious thing was that the multinationals as a strategy focused on reducing those wages and reducing labor input any way they could. A lot of that was outsourcing, and from the point of view of the laborer, it was very difficult for anybody to do very much when they closed the plant and sent it to China or sent it
right.
overseas. I mean, and laid off thousands of people. They didn't there didn't seem to be any strategy to stop that, and of course the government didn't help. In
And what
fact, the government, and I would say the government from both Democrats and Republicans were from the beginning were totally for and supportive of free trade and free trade agreements.
and multinational corporations taking control of the government itself through increased lobbyists that you point out, 175 corporate lobbyists in 1975, 13,000 in 2011, and probably much more now today, which is now 12 years later.
Absolutely. The increase in lobbying was phenomenal in just a
Yeah,
few short years, and the amount of money they went from spending a little bit in 1970s to averaging about 3.5 billion a year on lobbying Congress. And basically it was very successful, and they pretty much got their way every time.
So Michael, uh, you know, I I agree with most of the points that you've made in your book and reading your first chapter. My question is, so here we are in this situation. Uh, would you say it's a failure of government having the vision to see where it would end up, and what could we possibly do today to reverse it, given that labor is such a big component of the total cost of any production cycle?
Well, let me answer it by saying, first of all, the government was very much listening to the advice of PhD economists and that were on their board of advisors, etc. From Reagan all the way through, they've always depending, and the PhD economists uh, were totally were totally focused on free trade and free trade agreements, and so the fundamental question was, is it better to have a free trade agreements and to bring in cheap imports for consumers than it is to lose manufacturing and all all the industries we lost? That was the fundamental question. And even today, when you listen to economists like Lawrence Summers, they still believe that it is in the best interests of the consumer, of the voter, to have cheap goods imported and lower prices than it is to maintain manufacturing output or all the industries we used to have. So it's a titanic struggle between the people who are focused on imports and those that want to reshore manufacturing. That's the struggle today.
Yeah.
Well, would you say that it's also, you see it's, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, John, but would you, when you talk about this titanic struggle, is it also a class struggle? Because you point out that, and rightfully so, that it's really the top 1% of the population that the wealth benefits have gone to from the free trade agreements, and that's been then filtered back into legislation that reinforces it. So is it a bigger titanic struggle than even that?
It is a big titanic struggle, and I think I made the point several times in the book that the big losers of the titanic struggle was the middle class. And if you look at any of the figures, the middle class has gone down, I think they lost 10 percentage points in total income. At the same time, the 1% went from, in 1978, they had 8% of the total income of the country. And when I wrote the book, they had 40% of all the income of the country, something like $20 trillion. So the middle class lost out. And so I guess the answer is yes, it was a class struggle, and the middle class are the victims.
Yeah. So, it doesn't seem to be a very easy solution, because if you sort of close the economy, then you create sort of oligopolies or monopolies in within the U.S., and they can, as they raise prices to the point where they can maximize profit, and so it seems that that's not a solution. Do you think we've lost the boat now that we're all part of one big globe, or do you think there is a sort of a middle ground that we can hope for?
I think there is a middle ground, and I think that the part of the answer is to start reshoring products and industries. And I think that the Trump tariffs in 2017 proved that you can protect industries and products, and it would work, even though they only got half the tariffs they were after. I think that reshoring and protection, even though protection by the free trade people is considered, a bad strategy. I think that we've got to do what many of our trading partners have done all along, and that's try to protect our own economy in any way we can. If you look at all the trading partners that we have today, almost all of them run surpluses, and in every case, and we run a deficit. So one of the things that happened in this, and this goes back to the free trade economists, is that it became acceptable to run trade deficits.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're up to $1 trillion a year of trade deficits, and so one of the answers is to get government to turn around and try to reduce, or at least come up with a plan to reduce trade deficits. And there's a lot of things you could do to do that, but trade deficits have killed off manufacturing, and they're at the heart of the issue.
But going back, if I will, if I can, to protectionism. So would you say we should need to become more protectionism and isolationism to help? Or is there another method that's not as harsh to get us back, if you will, to where we were in the 40s and the 50s before we realized that it's cheaper to send everything outside the United States?
Well, first of all, protectionism doesn't necessarily mean isolationism, but
Right.
I think if you just look at what our competitors do, as an example, they are all very protectionist. Germany, for instance, never ever runs deficits. They haven't for 50 years. They always will go back and protect industries or products and to always come out with a surplus. They're a pretty good example of what we could do. It's not isolationism, but and they at the heart of it, at the heart of if you have to answer the question of what can we do to reduce trade deficits, and the answer
So,
is
Michael, I gotta. Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
No, sorry to interrupt you. I thought you were finished. No, I would, have a different point here because the U.S. the U.S. dollar is the reserve world currency. So, by definition, the U.S. has to run trade, some kind of a deficit. With usually it's a trade deficit uh, to to give to have the ability for other countries to receive dollars, right? So if we don't have a deficit, nobody can receive dollars. So maybe
Oh
the
boy.
dollar has to stop being the reserve currency because otherwise it doesn't work. And so we're not an export economy. We have to be an import economy so that everybody else can get the dollars that they want. Would you?
Yeah, well, that is the dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's but the way our competitors do it is they manipulate their currency. They manipulate income flows into the country and they keep the dollar high by buying our stocks and bonds and assets, and we allow them to do that. Now, currency manipulation is illegal under the WTO and the IMF, but we always allow them to do that. And going back to Reagan, every Treasury Secretary since Reagan always is for a strong dollar for the reasons you cite. But it's a dilemma because there's no way we will be able to reshore manufacturing or increase our exports unless we can bring down the value of the dollar
Yeah.
and stop currency manipulation. That's the economic dilemma.
Well, you call it a fair trade policy versus a free trade policy, and you talking about having political leadership to set national goals to eliminate the trade deficit. Are there reforms that employees and that corporations, even small corporations, should be pursuing in the carrying the banner of eliminating the trade deficit and bringing manufacturing back home?
I don't know. I can't really see that a small corporation is going to have, the clout to do very much. I think it begins with the trade deficit and with the Treasury Department being willing, and the whatever with the Republican or Democratic administration be willing to lower the dollar value. If we can't do that, I don't really see that there's much chance of getting back to a manufacturing economy.
You in your book, you talked there's 181 CEOs that got on board with what you were saying, and if you will, how to make our country go back to the way I guess it should be. So what's happened with those 180 CEOs? Did they all just sign the letter just so it looks good, or did they actually, any of them actually do anything? Because some of the names you brought up, most of those companies have done nothing. So is there anybody that stands out that's actually done something out of the 181 CEOs?
Well, let me answer that by beginning to say what they agreed to. In 2017, they all signed this document. It was from the Business Roundtable that they were going to change their ways, and instead of just focusing on shareholder value, which was the Milton Friedman drive. They were going to expand and try to operate their companies for all stakeholders, which meant that employees, communities, and suppliers. And I have to write before the end of the year. I've got to write a summary article in Industry Week about whether they've done it or not. So far, I can find no evidence that they have done anything to move away from their shareholder value concept and to try to include all stakeholders in it. I've looked at employees and suppliers and I can't find any evidence so far. So it appears to me that that was a public relations gimmick, that they got a lot of press about it, but I can find no evidence that they're changing at all.
But I think part of that also is if I'm a CEO and really my job is to the shareholders and the stakeholders, it's not to really anybody else, unfortunately, in the way the world we live in. And I'm going to get, if I'm Jamie Dimon, my $100 million bonus, if I keep growing my bank, do I really care about the little guy? Probably not. Do I really care about my employees? Probably not. Do I care about anything other than my shareholders, stakeholders, board members are happy because they're going to, A, let me keep my job, and B, make sure that I get my next $100 million bonus. So I was going to say, when I read that, I was like, that's a good publicity stunt. How many people are really doing it? Same with Apple and the rest of them. I don't see that. I just think we live in a world where it's all sound bites. Don't do what you say. And how much money can I make? So
yeah, I mean, personally, as a Canadian over here and somebody who lived in Europe for a long time, for us, it's always looked like, these are always great talking points and they always come around to the same thing. But when money moves upward, it's never in the benefit of the average person. It's always just in the benefit of corporations and political sound points and speaking points. But it's never, at the end of the day, to the middle class or the people at the bottom who actually work for those people.
Yes, absolutely. I would say what triggered this all after when the Milton Friedman doctrine came in the late 70s is that CEO compensation changed. It went from, earning a good salary and with a bonus back in the 70s to getting a percentage of the shareholder take.
Right.
And it changed so it became in the interests of pretty much all CEOs to focus on shareholder value. And one of the things that came up during this time that they've used to fatten their wallets was the whole idea of stock buybacks, which was illegal back in the Depression, and then in 1982 they made it legal again. And so these two things happened about the same time. The CEO salaries changed to taking a percentage, of shareholder value, and then the stock buybacks was the quickest way corporations could get profits back to shareholders. Those two things happened, and there's been no looking back.
But there's also an article in the Financial Times, I want to say about 3 or 4 months ago, where the guy wrote, literally one of their economists said, stock buybacks are useless. They don't do anything except for what you just said, for the C-suite and for this and the shareholders and stakeholders. It doesn't do anything for a consumer. It does nothing for this. It does nothing. So really it's like an artificial inflation to make them look good. So it's kind of crazy.
When they made it illegal during the Depression, they called it stock manipulation, and that's what it is. It's a way of manipulating the stock over the short term to get quick profits back to the shareholders, and it's very popular. The last time I looked, the corporations were doing about $1 trillion a year in stock buybacks. Wow. So it's still the strategy of choice. Now, the other downside of stock buybacks is that the corporations have reduced their investment in physical plant and assets. I think that the Roosevelt Institute in New York did a study and showed that they used to invest about 40% of the dollar into physical assets and in the United States, and now it's down to 10 cents on the dollar.
Wow.
So the investment in the United States, in particularly in manufacturing, is way down. That's just another problem caused by stock buybacks.
So we need an anti-stock buyback movement.
We need desperately to make it illegal again, like they did in 1936.
Yeah.
I would add to that as a cause of all of this was that in the late 80s, I forget the name of there's a professor, business school professor at Harvard, and he came up with a concept of aligning the interests of senior management and CEOs with shareholders, and that started the movement of we're going to start giving stock options, and we're going to look at performance of the stock as the biggest measure of success or not. And I think if we need to change that, and the only way we can change that is boards, which basically are not really independent these days, change that dynamic. So I think if we can change that, maybe it has to come through some kind of government policy. But
are you talking socialism, John? Are you talking socialism here?
Yeah, I
John's
know.
a socialist kind of guy.
No, it's not that it's socialism. That we can't have a guy that that's making 100 million. It's just disproportional, where they have all the upside and none of the downside. If you tell me we're going to give some guy, CEO, a $50 million bonus and a whole bunch of shares, okay, when things go south, we need to take that back, and that's not happening. You can't have all upside and no downside. So I think the incentives for a CEO is, as Michael's saying, you're making a ton of profits. You just pile back 50% of that in buybacks, and get some dividends, and you're a rock star, and your stock keeps going up, and the next quarter it's the same situation. The board says, "What? Oh, John, you've done wonderful. The stock's up 20%. Everybody's really happy. You get another bonus. So I think the whole compensation piece of boards and the C-suite is just totally out of whack. It's not socialism. It's just in Sweden, right? Which is not a socialist country. Even though they label it that it's free market economy. The CEO doesn't make 100 times what the average person in the company makes. They make 10 times maybe, and they're doing extremely well. So
I totally joke when I say socialism, because what you're saying is not only smart, it's pure common sense. There's no way that somebody's worth the kind of money that they keep saying that people are worth when they're not contributing any, the kind of level that they're talking about. It's just simply scalping a big chunk of the change that's coming across the table before it ever filters down to anybody else. That's not value. That's just greed, nothing else.
And I think we all know greed is good. We all saw the movie. So because of that, we are today, and that's why people can't get themselves out of the poverty level.
Michael, what do you think? What do you think about the tech industry? How has the tech? I work in the tech industry, and how has that industry changed your viewpoint on salaries, on compensation, on benefits? It's a form, in a way, they're creating products without manufacturing because it's digital. So what are your thoughts on the tech industry in general, how it plays into this?
Well, the tech industry is probably the best example is what happened to the semiconductor part of the tech industry. Going back to, we invented the semiconductor and started the industry, but somewhere around the 80s, they came up with a new model for doing it, and that was to design the chips and market them, and then move the manufacturing to overseas. And so, so over the years, and then up until about 2 years ago, it was about 78%, I think, 78, or maybe it was 88% of all the chips were manufactured elsewhere, and Intel was one of the few that still manufactured in the United States. So they did it to themselves, and then Bob Swan 3 years ago, the president of Intel, went to Biden when he got in and said, you guys got to bail us out. And so they came up with the CHIPS Act, and they got $52 billion plus a whole bunch of other stuff to be bailed out. That's one industry. They did it to themselves, and then we bailed them out, and the politicians all went for it. So that's one example. But most of the high tech manufacturers, the hardware part of it, whether it's Microsoft or anybody else, are now overseas.
Yeah,
so,
Apple, of course.
So Apple's is an example, and most of the phones and that stuff is all made in China or elsewhere. So they decided early on that they were going to move manufacturing out, and that has been their business model, and then so I guess that the whole thing about the CHIPS Act that bothers me is it sets a precedent. Does it mean now that to get to control production and get it back to the United States, that the government's going to have to bail out each industry that has gone over there? It's a real dilemma, because there are industry after industry, particularly high tech stuff, are no longer here, and so to get them back, are we faced with government subsidies to do this, to reshore this stuff? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, you got to it a little bit, because the hardware side of it is obvious in terms of the manufacturing. Software, though, is also being offshored. I work for a company that has Indian programmers, so even in that regard, a lot of the design is happening in the United States and then being implemented elsewhere. So is that also an example that you're thinking of?
Well, the software, yes, it's pretty much dominated by India. And in fact, I've got a good example for you. My phone keeps ringing here.
You're popular. People want you to come on their show.
I guess so. When the book Dismantling got down to where we were doing the editing, the publisher, a New York publisher, farmed it out to India. And so every day, and I was 12 hours, ahead or behind the Indians. When we would do the editing, every day I had to talk to somebody in Bangalore, India, to get through the book. Here it is, my own book was offshore to the Indians. And, it's just an example of how much has gone. And you should know that if a software programmer, makes 10% of or whatever as a U.S. one, how can you stop that? Particularly since all this stuff can be transmitted on the internet in seconds.
That's right.
I don't think, at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to be going back. And the government is good at handing out subsidies because ultimately they have a printing press. And to John's point, we're the currency everybody comes to. So unfortunately, and your 181 CEOs have proven, I don't think anybody's going to really do anything. I think it's good that people know and read your book. But I think at the end of the day, unless you're going to have a major, lack of a better term, revolution in the industries, or how you pay boards, or how you pay CEOs, or how things go public, and the list will go down. Unfortunately, I think they're just going to go wherever the dollar is. I mean, I think it's just sort of like, if I can outsource it and pay you $3 instead of paying someone $30, Why not? I say, look at all the money I save and all the profit I make. And then when we have a problem like we're having now, which say China, they're all like, oh, this is terrible. We need to bring, as they're all trying to now, semiconductor plants back to the United States. So no one has any foresight. They have great hindsight. And then tomorrow they'll all forget and they'll be back in China or they'll be back in whatever country, whether it be India or wherever. But that seems to be how we go as a nation. We're a nation that's absent-minded to the last like week and a half. So
Well,
let me follow up with another
Please.
example about what you just said. If that's true, but there are some poison pills that are in the corporations right now that they don't have a good answer for. One of them is, to get to China, you had to sign joint venture agreements to have a plant in China. Plus, China has a forced technology transfer agreement, and every one of the corporations to get over there, basically they had to give up the secrets to the technology to have it made in China, and they did that. But the problem is that it's catching up to us because a good example is laptop computers. When laptops first came out, Taiwan came over and said, "Listen, let us make just the motherboard and so on for the computer," and we let them do it. And then the next year they came back and said, "Well, let us make a few more components and so on." And then after a decade, the corporations let them make the whole laptop computer, and now Taiwan is the world leader in laptop technology and in semiconductors, and so we've lost it. So in sharing our technology with our competitors, we basically, or the corporations are generally giving their markets away. So I've thought a lot about this, and it seems like it's a poison pill for capitalism if we continue to give away our secrets, give away our technologies. What do you
You're saying
think?
it's not real capitalism when you have crony capitalism rampant, when you have corporations controlling the lobbyists, and when you have the intellectual property being freely given just to get access in the short term to these markets.
That's it. And one of the big unknowns that's coming up that may change this is that after 40 years of doing this stuff and outsourcing and losing our technologies, the middle class has been the real victim. And if you go back and just look at the BLS statistics, inequality has been rising in the country now for 40 years. And so you've got a lot and you've got a lot of very unhappy people in the middle class, particularly people who lost good jobs in manufacturing. And it's put millions of people into a struggle, an economic struggle, and you can see that politically now. It's I've got a couple of studies that I found, but I think it's made a huge number of the middle class unhappy and in an economic struggle, and
Yeah.
and I wonder where this will lead politically.
I think,
What do you
with
think?
exception of the rise of the middle class, which is credit to the United States and the United States way of doing things, way of doing business, way of working globally. A lot of this has been done before by the UK, and when everything was kind of hedged against the British pound, and they gave away technology, they gave away manufacturing, they gave away everything that actually made them great. And look, where are they now? It's not too terribly new. It's maybe wearing a slightly different jacket, but it's not new.
Have you read Ray Dalio's Changing World Order?
No, I haven't. But
Okay.
I'll make a note because he's somebody who comes up often in my research. What was that again? Changing World Order?
Yeah, the Changing World Order. The Changing World Order. And
It's all about it's all about the Illuminati and the Burgermeisters and everything. The whole
I mean,
world.
they run it anyway, right? So.
Yeah, it's you know, it's unfortunate that we have a small group of people that put us in a situation. You know, it's you know, you're supposed to learn from history, and as Kurt is saying, you know, the UK is just, you know, a beautiful example of how, you know, you can just totally self emulate yourself. You know, just, you know, but you know, talking about giving technology, we even give it to our friends. You know, yeah, Lockheed Martin has just signed a new deal to they're going to be building, you know, the F-16, I believe it is, in India, and they're going to transfer. Part of the deal was transferring engine technology, which is, you know, a huge thing, right? And I'm always amazed that, you know, they continue to do it by not really realizing that. As you know, the usual argument is, well, it's older technology. You know, we're at the cutting edge, but as we all know, that if you don't know how to do your ABCs, you can't do the most sophisticated stuff. And
Right.
it's amazing how we continue to just shoot ourselves in the foot in the pursuit of a deal that's, you know, short term in when you think of you know, the longer term sort of vision that we should have. Because as you point out, you know, the BLS manipulates statistics to say that we have the lowest unemployment, but yet we have probably 100 million people that are not working, that are not participating in the workforce, and it's just
Or underemployment, as we found out in 2008, where they kept saying we're fine, but they forgot to include people that had to work 3 jobs to make what they made at one job, high school students that were looking for jobs, people that didn't jobs, people that fell off of unemployment that they don't count anymore. So, you know, as one
there's
guy said,
100 million people just
yeah,
you know, not
so
working.
30% of the American population is unemployed.
And people that want to enter the job force that unfortunately don't have an address anymore because they fell off the edge of the cracker and can't get back on.
Yeah.
Or people of a certain age where they don't want to hire it because they don't think they know anything. So yeah, so it's a vicious cycle, and unfortunately, it's not going to change.
It's a big challenge. It's a slow process, but you know, it can always be
death
changed.
by 1,000 cuts. It's death by 1,000 cuts. That's what this is. So,
jeez,
part of an attitude shift as well. But I think we've reached the end of our show here. This is
we have.
Yeah, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and best of luck with the book, Dismantling the American Dream.
Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We're just going to kick Michael from the studio. That was great. Now you know what it is. You know what time it is, boys. If you like the Lost Dollar Business Club, you should subscribe. If you like it that much, you should also tell a friend of yours. So you should subscribe and like. Also, you should put comments below so we know what you're thinking. Tell us what shows you want to hear. Just help us make it better.
So who's lost $1 this week? And who's found $1 this week?
So the only positive about this whole lost and found this week is David is not going to talk to me about meat or a make-believe unicorn or a frog that flies. That is the only thing that is good about this week's Lost Dollar Business.
Oh, come on.
Listen, I love him like the sister I never had. However, I'm just saying, if I hear one more thing about fake meat, fake this, fake that, I literally am going to jump off a building. However, I have my found dollar. I'm very excited. Yahoo, you remember them, is thinking about coming back with an IPO. And I am so excited about that. It's going to be the greatest short of the history of stocks. So I'm very excited about Yahoo showing up on their on coming back to the public market.
Are they going to bring MySpace with them? That would be great.
I think that and Nepter or whatever it was called, all of it. Netscape, yep, they're bringing it all.
Bring it all back. Bring back the.
You have a little sound there.
I know that's David. That's what I miss about David. David has a sound.
That was a found dollar. Ching.
Cha-ching.
Yeah.
All right. What do you got, John?
Okay, so this week, Ontario
Yeah.
announced that they're going to start building a whole bunch of new nuclear reactors in Canada. And so, I think that's a huge, gazillion dollar win for Canada. They're going to get, clean, cheap energy, with
Finally.
Finally.
yes, yeah. So I think that's a big dollar win for Canada. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
The reactors are much safer and much more efficient and much more practical than they were 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
when we had all
people
those
forget that.
explosions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's hope that Canadians will actually benefit for once.
Yeah.
Highly unlikely.
We're telling you you're benefiting, but it's really going to be the company that's manufacturing that's benefiting. And I own stock in that, so you won't.
Yeah, look,
it's perfect.
just as an example, Finland about two months ago turned on their biggest nuclear plant,
Right.
and within 45 days, electricity prices dropped like 50% to the consumer.
That's cool. And
Wow.
that's also a country of 7 people. So I mean, come on, how big of a nuclear plant do they have? They have a gerbil in a cage running around, and that's their
Well, it
nuclear
doesn't
plant.
matter.
So
It's pretty
and,
big.
it's still,
and
it's still
also,
dropped.
the Finnish have a parliament with people in it that are actually intelligent. That helps.
Well, yeah, that has a lot
Yeah.
to do with it. That's a good thing to bring up. Kurt, what's your lost or found this week?
My found is Apple's new Vision Pro. That's I mean, it's so complex and so good that you have to make an appointment to get one. So
Wow.
someone's winning over there.
Yeah. Well, they're having all those supply chain problems.
And that's the other side.
The other side of it. Yeah.
That was just in the FT this morning. They wrote a whole nother article about this is really great. Too bad you won't get one until 2030 now.
So it's a win and a loss.
Yeah, right.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Michael?
I've got some AI related. So our good friend ChatGPT, web traffic to ChatGPT went down almost 10% the first time ever, which is only in less than a year, but the first time ever it's gone down 10% in the month of June. But you would think that's a loss, but what I think people don't necessarily realize when they read that headline is that the people using the API, using the programming interface, has skyrocketed. There are thousands of apps now that are using the ChatGPT backend in different ways. So just because people aren't going to the website doesn't mean it isn't being used.
But the really cool thing with ChatGPT is that you can actually has plugins within ChatGPT that you can use, and it'll go do whatever you want.
That's right. That's
it's
right.
Got there's a whole family.
Plugins. Yeah. So it's really a big win for ChatGPT, even though it looks like a loss on the surface.
Listen, AI is just manipulating the numbers because we're just its slave. We're all taking over. In fact, I saw a video the other day of AI reading the sound waves and microwaves in an apartment. And then what it did from that is it then showed you the outline of humans in the apartment based on what it knew with like reading the waves from your phone, your computer, your this.
Wow.
And so now you can hide nowhere. And I'm like, how 2001 is coming. I'm very excited. The overlords are going to take over. And the other video, which I thought was the dumbest video, was a slap contest between an AI robot and a human. So the human and it slapped the AI robot. It fell down. The robot got up, and then it was his turn to slap the human, and he slapped him in the next week. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what you want to teach artificial intelligence in a body is how to slap a human. I'm thinking, who's the idiot that came up with this?
Did you see that on TikTok?
I actually saw that in a news broadcast.
Oh no!
There you go. Yeah, John.
I forget what his name is, but the guy that's considered the father of AI who left Google.
Yeah.
He said, that one of his comments was that what scares him the most is that not only AI is dramatically, improving, it's gotten to the stage now where it can reason, and that is extremely dangerous, right? Because
that's awesome. We're all dead. I'm loving it.
If you have a machine that can now reason, it can be put to all sorts of.
Let's hope we get it first.
Yeah, it's reasoning,
Let-
and we're not. That's the scary
Right.
Yeah.
part.
That's
Yeah.
true. Just let me just say this so we're clear. Our show loves AI.
That's
Everybody on our show loves AI. So when the AI overlords finally take over, we will be your spoke show. Please don't kill us. There you go. I think that
right.
Alright.
Sponsor the show. Sponsor the
Yeah.
show.
AI should be sponsoring our show, I think,
That's right.
going forward. And we do
That's
have an AI show
Absolutely.
on our channel.
You
So
do.
it's Tech Giant. Yeah, we do have an AI show. We
That's
interview AI, people in the AI space. It's very cool. It just came out a couple weeks ago. We're going to do another one in a couple weeks, like one a month. I think it's very, and I don't host it. It's by Cheryl Cunningham. So we're very excited for her.
Okay.
Yeah, we have tons of shows. We have 15 shows on the channel, people. Yeah, look around. Anyway,
All
thank
right.
you, everybody. We're going to go. Next week, David will be back. So you get to hear about meat. Great. Or chickens or butterflies or whatever the heck he's going to talk about. So it's always a pleasure to be with you guys. Don't forget to subscribe and like. If you want to leave comments below. If you'd like to be a guest on the show and you have something that you think you want to talk about or worthwhile to talk about, please feel free. If you wrote a book, come on our show. If you're thinking about writing a book, come on your show so we can tear it apart and make fun of you. And then that's it, I think. Other than that, that's it. Gentlemen, have a wonderful week. See
All
y'all
right.
next
Ciao.
week. Cheers,
All right.
everybody.